Hey there, sleepless rabble. Get comfortable because tonight we're not just revisiting a case you think you know. We're going deeper. Past the headlines, past the Netflix documentary, and straight into the part nobody talks about. The aftermath. The prison letters. The vanished mistress. And the strange new life of a man the world can't stop Googling. But first, let's go back to where everyone believed life was perfect. A sunny little suburb, two smiling kids, a proud dad, and an Instagram feed that looked like a Hallmark ad. For the next few minutes, it's all soft edges and happy filters, until the cracks start showing. Before we dive in, hit that like button. Subscribe if you love true crime that puts you to sleep in the most unsettling way possible. And drop a comment with this. Do you think social media hides reality? Or do we just love the illusion? I'll be reading your thoughts later. Alright, lights down, mind quiet. Let's start. This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you're listening to Boring True Crime for Sleep. Picture this. A quiet Colorado suburb, streets lined with neat lawns and freshly washed SUVs. The kind of place where people wave when they see you at the mailbox. Where everyone knows your dog's name, and where nothing bad ever really happens. Or at least, that's the story everyone tells themselves. And then there was this family. Picture perfect. A husband who hit the gym before sunrise, flashing that bright smile in every photo. A wife who built a small empire on social media, motivational quotes, family moments, matching outfits for every holiday. Two little girls, sweet as sugar, the kind who melt your heart when they giggle on camera. There were videos of them singing songs in the back seat, birthday parties with Pinterest-level decorations, and even a brand new baby on the way. Scroll through their Instagram back then, and you'd think, that's the dream. A modern fairy tale, the American ideal packaged in warm colours and hashtags like number blessed. And maybe you'd feel a tiny bit envious, because compared to their smiling snapshots, your life might feel a little dull. But that's the magic of filters, isn't it? They make the cracks disappear. Now, if you look closely, and only if, you might notice something. Not in the photos themselves, but in the rhythm behind them. The way her captions sound a little too perfect. The way his smile seems rehearsed, like an actor playing a part. Not enough to raise alarms, not yet. Just a whisper that maybe the fairy tale wasn't as solid as it looked. But of course, no one in that neighborhood was whispering. Not then. They saw a thriving family, a bright future, and a woman who worked hard to keep it all together. And she did. At least on the surface. Behind closed doors, though, the air felt different. A little colder, a little heavier, like something unspoken was lingering in the corners. The funny thing about stories like this, they always start with silence. A silence so ordinary you'd never notice it, until it's gone. And in this case, that silence began on a Monday morning. It started quietly. The kind of morning where the world feels half asleep. The sun had just begun to stretch across the rooftops of Frederick, painting the quiet streets gold. Most people were easing into their Monday. Coffee brewing, engines starting, another work week ticking into motion. In a house that seemed like the picture of stability, something felt still. Too still. Shanann Watts had flown back late the night before from a business trip in Arizona. It was a long weekend of work. A team event. A blur of flights and hotel lobbies. She was tired, bone tired, but relieved to be home. There were text messages to prove it. Cheerful emojis and little comments about seeing the kids in the morning. Except morning came and nothing followed. No texts to friends, no social media posts, which for Shanann was unusual. Her phone, normally buzzing like a beehive, had gone silent. And for someone like her, organized, communicative, always checking in, that silence was deafening. Nicole Atkinson, her close friend, noticed first. Nicole wasn't the type to panic over small things, but something about the quiet tugged at her gut. She had expected a text by now, maybe a quick update after the late night flight. So she sent a message. Nothing. Another one. Still nothing. Calls went straight to voicemail. Hours stretched, and with every tick of the clock, unease pulled deeper in her stomach. By late morning, Nicole decided enough was enough. She drove over to Shanann's house, telling herself it was just to check in, just to be sure everything was okay. The house looked the same as always. Orderly, serene. No sign of trouble from the outside. The blinds were drawn, the driveway empty except for Chris's truck. She knocked. Waited. Knocked again. The silence pressed against her ears. Nicole dialed Shanann's number one more time, listening to the hollow ring before voicemail picked up. That's when the first real tremor of fear broke through. So she called Chris. He answered, calm, almost too calm, saying Shanann had taken the girls on a playdate. His voice didn't shake. No hesitation. If anything, he sounded casual. But the story didn't sit right. Nicole knew Shanann. She knew her routines, her habits. She wouldn't just vanish without telling someone, especially not when she had a doctor's appointment that day. An important one. Something was wrong. Nicole could feel it now crawling under her skin. So she made another call, this time to the police. When the officer arrived, body cam rolling, the scene still looked picture perfect. Bright sunshine on quiet streets, a pristine house in a peaceful neighborhood. Chris showed up a few minutes later, easy smile in place, wearing his work clothes like any other day. He greeted the officer politely, hands moving in wide, open gestures, the kind you make when you want to seem helpful, cooperative. But even in that first interaction, if you know what to look for, there's a flicker of something else. A stiffness around the eyes. Words that feel rehearsed. He talks about Shanann like he's reading from a script, filling the air with details no one asked for. And while he speaks, he doesn't seem worried. Just busy performing concern. The officer steps inside the house, the camera capturing everything. The couch cushions neat, the kitchen spotless, toys lined up in their usual places. There's no chaos, no sign of a struggle, just a home that feels oddly staged, like it's waiting for a family that isn't coming back. And yet, in that tidy calm, something doesn't add up. Shanann's purse is there, her keys, even her phone, sitting silently, as if waiting for her hand to pick it up again. For a woman who practically lived through her phone, leaving it behind was unthinkable. The officer notes it all, keeping his tone neutral, but the questions are already stacking up. And in the middle of it, Chris moves from room to room, chatting, explaining, volunteering little stories about the morning. His voice stays smooth, but his body tells a different tale. Restless hands, shifting weight, glances the dart a little too often toward the floor. Outside, neighbors gather, curious. One offers to pull up his security footage, a casual gesture that will soon become a turning point. But for now, it's just another quiet moment in a neighborhood that still thinks this is just a misunderstanding. The officer doesn't push too hard yet. That time will come. For now, the search begins with soft steps and polite questions. But under the surface, the tide is turning. The perfect life is starting to fray, and no amount of smiling for the camera can hold it together anymore. And this is just the beginning. The officer's body cam keeps rolling as they move through the house, every frame preserving a story that hasn't yet been told. The air feels strangely hollow, like a stage after the audience has gone home. Bright daylight spills across polished floors, bouncing off family photos that beam with curated happiness. In one frame, Shanann cradles her daughters, her smile radiant, her eyes sparkling with that glow of someone who believes in forever. In another, Chris stands tall beside her, his arm draped casually across her shoulders. The perfect partner, the proud father. These frozen smiles speak louder now, like props in a play that ended without warning. The officer asks routine questions, his voice calm, almost gentle, as he scribbles notes on a small pad. Chris answers each one readily, with the kind of fluid ease you don't often see in situations like this. He talks about Shanann's pregnancy, about the girls, about how she planned to take them to a friend's house that morning. His tone? Smooth. Almost polished. Too polished, maybe. Like someone who rehearsed in the mirror before walking out the door. And then, something small. A flicker in the officer's expression. A shadow crossing his face as his gaze sweeps the room again. Shanann's purse sits quietly on the kitchen counter. Inside, her wallet, credit cards, driver's license. Beside it, her phone, dark, lifeless, abandoned in a place it never should have been. This isn't a woman who walked out to cool off. This isn't a quick errand gone long. No, this is something else. Chris notices the officer noticing, and he fills the space with more words, more explanations, trying to plaster over the cracks. He rambles about work, about schedules, about how they've been emotional lately, but nothing serious. The word hangs in the air like smoke, curling into the corners of the room. Emotional. A vague label for something heavier, something unspoken. Then comes a knock at the door. A neighbor. Friendly, helpful, offering something that seems trivial at first. Security camera footage. Chris agrees quickly, maybe too quickly, and they all shuffle down the quiet suburban street. The officer's boots crunching softly on the pavement, the summer sun warm on their backs. Inside the neighbor's living room, the screen lights up with grainy black and white footage. The driveway across the street, the familiar silhouette of Chris's truck, the timestamp glowing faintly in the corner. They watch as Chris loads something into the back of his work vehicle in the early morning hours, moving with deliberate slowness. Over and over, his body bends, lifts, disappears, returns. The footage is shaky, unclear, but clear enough to plant a seed. The officer glances at Chris just briefly, and here, in this quiet moment, the first real crack appears. Chris's body stiffens, just slightly. His arms fold across his chest, a subconscious shield. His smile fades a fraction, his jaw tightening for the briefest heartbeat, before snapping back into that mask of calm. He talks, filling the silence with nervous chatter about the neighborhood, about his work truck, about how he always parks it there, about anything but what they're all seeing. The neighbor, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, can't hide his skepticism. He's not usually like this, he mutters when Chris steps out of earshot. He's jumpy, talkative, not like himself. The officer nods slowly, his face unreadable, but inside, a quiet alarm begins to hum. Something isn't lining up. Outside, Chris paces the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying fragments of conversation to no one in particular. He keeps moving. Forward. Back. Forward again. like a man trying to outrun the weight of the moment. The camera catches every detail. The restless shifting of his feet, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes keep scanning, as if looking for an escape route that doesn't exist. And here's the thing, guilty or not, stress leaves fingerprints. It settles into the muscles, creeps into gestures, twists the rhythm of speech. Chris is leaving fingerprints everywhere, on every word, every movement. The officer sees it, the neighbor feels it, and soon the world will see it too. But for now, no one says the word everyone's afraid to say. Not yet. For now, it's still a missing persons case. A wife, 2 little girls, a family that vanished like smoke in the sun, and a husband who smiles for the camera but can't quite hide the shadows gathering behind his eyes. The footage ends. The officer thanks the neighbor, jotting notes that will become pivotal later. Chris offers another polite smile, his voice steady as stone, even as the ground beneath him begins to crumble. Because here's the truth about masks. They hold, and they hold, until they don't. The search will continue into the evening. Questions will multiply like cracks in glass, and tomorrow, Chris will walk into a police station thinking he can still talk his way out of this. He has no idea that the walls are already closing in. Morning slides into afternoon, and the house that once pulsed with life now feels like an empty shell. Outside, the media has arrived. A couple of vans first, then more. Cameras sprouting like weeds on the front lawn. Reporters rehearsing lines as the summer air thickens with heat and speculation. Missing wife, missing kids, perfect family gone without a trace. It's the kind of headline that glues people to the screens, sipping coffee and whispering, something like that could never happen here, except here it is. And then Chris steps forward, center stage. The husband, the worried father, framed by the doorway of his immaculate home. His t-shirt clings to his chest, his face arranged into an expression of concern that looks borrowed. The cameras roll, the microphones lean in, and Chris begins his performance. She came home around 2 a.m, he says, voice steady. We talked a little. It was emotional, but I just want them back. If someone has them, please. Bring them home. He blinks in all the right places, exhales like a man carrying a weight too heavy for words. He presses his hands together, eyes darting toward the lens as if pleading with the world. It's a picture-perfect display of worry, except for the cracks. They're small, but they're there. Watch closely. His tone never quite hits that raw edge of panic. His shoulders stay squared, almost too squared, like someone posing for a portrait instead of falling apart. There are no trembling hands, no wandering gaze toward the horizon where hope might be hiding. Instead, there's calculation. Tiny, precise movements choreographed to look unscripted. The reporters lap it up, feeding sound bites to their stations. But the people who matter aren't fooled. Not entirely. Law enforcement watches the same footage and sees something else. A man trying too hard to sell a story. Back at headquarters, detectives trade quiet looks over monitors. His language is off, his timeline loose. There's a studied calm in his face, a stillness that doesn't match the chaos of the situation. And then there's the strangest thing. He never asked the question most desperate parents choke out. Are they okay? He wants them home, yes. But does he want them safe? The words never leave his lips. As night falls, the house remains a crime scene in everything but name. Inside, Chris walks from room to room. The camera's gone now, leaving only shadows in their wake. He sits on the edge of the couch, phone glowing in his palm, scrolling through news alerts about himself, reading comments from strangers who, for now, still believe he's a grieving husband. But the tide is turning. Tomorrow, the officers will invite him in for a chat. Just routine, they'll say. Nothing to worry about. They'll offer coffee, maybe a little joke to ease the tension. They'll ask him to tell the story again in that same calm voice he's practiced. And then, when the timing is right, they'll slide a piece of paper across the table, attach a few wires, and ask a simple question. Do you want to take a polygraph test? Chris will smile then. He'll say yes, because he believes he can beat it, because he still thinks he's in control. But control is an illusion. And tomorrow, the mask starts to crack. The next day dawns bright and clear. The kind of summer morning that smells of cut grass and fresh coffee. But for Chris Watts, the air feels heavy. Not that you'd know it from his face. He walks into the Frederick Police Department like a man heading to a routine meeting. Casual clothes, that same polite smile, a calmness so polished it almost shines. Almost. The detectives greet him warmly, all handshakes and easy voices, steering him toward a small room painted in neutral tones. A table, 2 chairs, a camera perched quietly in the corner. Nothing flashy, nothing intimidating, because this isn't about fear. Not yet. This is about comfort. About making him feel like he's in control. He sits. They talk. Small things first. Weather, work, kids' favorite snacks. The rhythm is gentle, almost conversational. That's the tactic. Build a bridge, make him feel safe enough to step onto it. They slide a coffee across the table, offer water, smile. Every move is deliberate, every word chosen to lower his guard. Then comes the ask. Soft, almost casual. Would you be willing to take a polygraph? Just to clear things up. Chris doesn't hesitate. He leans forward, nods. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely. Confidence radiates off him like heat from asphalt. He believes he can beat the machine. Because in his mind, this isn't a machine. It's theatre. And he's been acting for days. The examiner enters. A woman with calm eyes and a voice like warm honey. She chats as she straps the sensors to his body, her tone light, friendly, like they're just 2 people killing time. The wires snake across his chest, the cuff tightens around his arm, and for the first time, Chris looks less like a man and more like a specimen under glass. Remember, she says gently, this only works if you're honest. He smiles, nods again. Of course. The test begins. Baseline questions first. Name, date, the kind of truths no one trips over. His breathing stays steady, his heart rate calm. Then the questions shift, inching closer to the heart of it all. Do you know where your wife is? No. Do you know where your children are? No. Did you cause them to disappear? A fraction of a second. Too fast to catch with the naked eye, but the sensors don't miss it. A spike in the ink. A stutter in the breath. His voice remains even, but the machine hears the tremor his body can't hide. When it's over, the examiner unhooks the wires with the same easy grace, chatting about nothing as she collects her notes. Then she looks him in the eye, her voice still soft, but edged now with steel. Chris, you failed. The words hang in the air like a crack of thunder in a clear sky. He blinks and swallows, forces a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Failed? That doesn't make sense. But the room has shifted. The warmth has cooled. The space feels smaller. 2 detectives slide back into their chairs, their friendly faces tinged now with quiet gravity. They don't yell. They don't threaten. They lean in, voices low, coaxing, weaving the net tighter with every syllable. Chris, we know something happened. We just need to understand why. It's a lifeline disguised as a question. Not did you do it, but why did it happen? A subtle twist that shifts the weight from guilt to explanation, from condemnation to confession. For hours he clings to his story, fingers twisting in his lap, knuckles whitening under the strain. He talks about Shanann leaving, about playdates that never happened, about not knowing, not understanding. The words keep coming, but their shine is gone. They fall flat, brittle as dry leaves, crumbling under the heat of the detective's quiet persistence. Finally, they bring out the ace. Not anger, not accusation, but something softer, sharper. Your dad's here, Chris. Do you want to talk to him? And that's when the dam begins to crack. The door opens with a soft click, and in walks a man who looks like the embodiment of steady hands and quiet nights. A father who raised his son to believe in hard work, loyalty, family. He doesn't know it yet, but in the next hour, that foundation will fracture in ways neither of them can ever repair. Chris looks up, and for the first time since this began, his mask slips. Just a fraction, but enough. The tension in his shoulders collapses an inch. His lips twitch, fighting to hold a smile that never arrives. He's tired now. The endless hours of talking, the polite interrogation, the needle-scratching truth in black ink across white paper. He's running out of room to breathe. His dad sits across from him, leaning forward, forearms resting on his knees, voice soft as worn denim. Son, what happened? No accusation, no edge, just a question carved from pure concern. And that's the key. It slices through the last of Chris's defenses like a whisper through glass. The words don't come all at once. They stumble out, jagged and clumsy, as if dragged from the dark corners of a mind that's been rehearsing lies for too long. It got emotional, he says. We had a fight. His gaze drops to the floor, fixing on some invisible stain in the carpet. His voice thins, threads pulling apart. I didn't mean for... He trails off, choking on the truth that refuses to stay buried. His father waits. Still, his silence a kind of mercy. The detectives stand back, saying nothing, letting the weight of the moment do their work. This is their tactic now. Not pressure, not noise, but stillness. The kind that makes a man hear his own heartbeat, pounding like a war drum. Chris exhales, a slow, shuddering leak of air. Then the dam bursts. Not with details, not yet, but with the shape of the thing everyone's been circling. She hurt the girls, he blurts out, the words tumbling over each other in their desperation to exist. A lie nested inside the truth, a final attempt to salvage the shards of his image, to paint himself as a man who snapped to protect, not destroy. The detectives know this story. They've heard it before in rooms just like this, from faces just as calm and broken. It's the script of the guilty, the pivot from denial to justification, the frantic reach for a narrative that makes them something other than a monster. But lies have gravity. They sink under their own weight, pulling everything else down with them. And as Chris talks, the contradictions multiply, tangling around his ankles like chains. He's no longer the polished man from the doorstep, speaking in clean lines and curated gestures. He's unraveling now, threads snapping one by one. The camera watches, unblinking. The fluorescent lights hum. Time stretches, folds in on itself. Outside, the sun begins to dip, throwing long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, another shadow takes root. The knowledge that this isn't a missing persons case anymore. It's something darker, something irreversible. The detectives leave the room, giving him space, letting the silence press its cold hand against his back. In that silence, Chris slumps forward, face buried in his hands. When he finally looks up, his eyes are glassy, rimmed with the kind of red that comes from more than lack of sleep. He knows what's coming. The world will know soon too. But for now, it's just this room, this table, this broken conversation between father and son. The first tremor of truth in a case that's about to detonate. And outside that room, the cameras are waiting. The microphones. The headlines that will stretch across the globe by morning. By the time Chris steps out of that interrogation room, the world outside has changed. The cameras that were politely camped on his lawn yesterday are now a siege line, lenses hungry, microphones trembling like antennae catching a storm. The headlines are already spinning. Husband brought in for questioning. Words like suspect haven't landed yet, but they're hovering in the wings, ready to strike. The detectives escort him quietly. No raised voices. No metal clatter of cuffs just yet. They still treat him like a man, not a monster. Because theatrics don't solve cases. Procedure does. But every gesture is heavy now. Carved from the certainty that this isn't the worried father the world thought they knew. This is something else. Outside, the heat presses down, thick and relentless. Reporters jostle for position, shouting questions that hang unanswered in the air. Chris, where are your girls? Did you hurt Shanann? Do you have anything to say? He keeps his head down, jaw set, lips stretched into that tight half smile that no longer convinces anyone. The cameras devour his silence, broadcasting it into living rooms where viewers lean forward, coffee cups trembling in their hands. Look at his face, they whisper. He doesn't look upset. He doesn't look scared. Social media lights up like a wildfire. Hashtags breeding theories, armchair detectives sharpening their claws. Back at the Watts house, the quiet suburb has transformed into a circus. Yellow tape flutters in the breeze, police vehicles crowd the street, and neighbors stand in clusters, their voices hushed but urgent. They talk about the footage from the security cam, about how Chris was loading his truck that morning, about how he seemed off even before all this. The kind of hindsight that feels sharp as glass once you know where to look. Inside the station, the pieces are locking into place. Phone records, text messages, bank data, each one a tile in a mosaic that tells a story far darker than anyone wanted to believe. They find the affair, of course. It was hiding in plain sight, a thread waiting to be pulled. Her name surfaces in the files like a shadow under clear water, and suddenly the picture sharpens. A man chasing freedom. A new life. A clean slate scrubbed of responsibilities. The narrative writes itself, though the ink is smeared with disbelief. How do you reconcile the videos of a father kissing his daughter's cheeks with the cold math of motive? You don't. You just document, log, and prepare to read it aloud in a courtroom under fluorescent lights. By evening, the words no one wanted to hear are official. Arrested. Charged. The perfect husband, the Instagram dad with the bright smile, is now a headline in bold font. And the house where he once filmed those cheerful family updates, it's silent again, except for the hum of forensic teams combing through drawers and carpets, searching for whispers of truth hidden in fibers and dust. Across the country, the story metastasizes, spreading through news feeds like a virus. People argue in comment sections, some clinging to the fantasy that he's innocent, others dissecting every syllable of his interviews like tea leaves. True crime podcasts scramble to record emergency episodes. Netflix takes notes, because this isn't just a case anymore, it's a spectacle. And in the middle of it, Chris sits alone in a cell, the performance finally stripped away, the script burned to ash. No cameras now, no curated smiles. Just a man and the four walls closing in. But this isn't the end. Not even close. The courtroom drama is still to come. The plea deal. The life sentence that will turn concrete and steel into the borders of his world. And then, the letters. The strange, fevered ramblings from a man who traded bedtime stories for Bible verses, who blames the woman he once called salvation, and who still haunts the corners of the internet like a ghost people can't stop chasing. That's where we're headed next. There's something about wide open spaces that makes secrets feel heavier. Maybe it's the sky, too big, too bright, too honest. Or maybe it's the silence, stretching for miles, swallowing the sound of anything you'd rather not hear. That's what the investigators feel as they roll down the dirt road leading to an oil site on the edge of Weld County. A flat expanse of land scattered with storage tanks and metal towers, their silhouettes cutting against the horizon like skeletal giants. The tip came straight from Chris. He gave them directions after hours of circling lies, after the polygraph, after the story he'd rehearsed started to collapse under its own weight. He said it softly, like someone confessing the location of a ghost. And now here they are, tires crunching over gravel, the sun already burning high, the heat wrapping everything in a shimmering haze. There's no drama in the way the officers move, no shouted commands, no cinematic music swells. Just quiet efficiency. Boots grinding in dust. Voices clipped and low. They've done this before, though maybe not with stakes that press so hard against the lungs. Each step carries the gravity of what they expect to find. The tanks rise like sleeping beasts, hulking and indifferent, their metal skin gleaming under the relentless sun. It's an industrial nowhere. The kind of place you drive past without a second glance, never guessing it could hold the worst secret of a perfect suburban dream. The air smells of oil and heat-baked earth, a chemical tang that clings to the back of the throat, and then confirmation. Not all at once, not with a cry, but in a slow, sick bloom of realization that spreads from one set of eyes to the next. Evidence. Enough to turn suspicion into certainty. Enough to freeze time in its tracks. Radios crackle, calls go out. The machinery of law enforcement begins to spin faster now. Documentation, containment, a sudden surge of precision as the site transforms into something both sacred and profane. A crime scene. Back at headquarters, the words hit the air like a hammer. They found them. Simple, almost sterile, but heavy enough to bow spines. There's no cheering in rooms like these. No sense of victory. Just a grim nod. A hollowing out because answers don't heal. They just close the door on hope and open another to grief. And for Chris, the moment the confirmation reaches his ears, whatever mask he had left shatters. He doesn't rage. He doesn't collapse in sobs. He just folds inward, like paper set in water, edges curling under an invisible tide. The performance is over. The script is ash. By nightfall, the news bleeds across every screen in America. The bodies have been recovered. Anchors speak in grave tones. Headlines bloom in fonts too bold for comfort. Neighbors who once waved at the Watts family now stare at their own hands. wondering how close darkness can live without making a sound. And tomorrow, Chris Watts will walk into a courtroom to hear words that sound like nails sealing a coffin. Life without parole. But that's the next chapter. For now, the stage goes dark on a field where the sun blazed too bright and the earth swallowed secrets no suburb was ever built to hold. The courthouse smells faintly of paper and disinfectant. That sterile cocktail of bureaucracy and judgment. People file into the gallery like shadows, their shoes whispering against the tile. The air hums with a tension so dense you could almost bottle it. Sell it as the scent of reckoning. Chris enters through a side door, shackles at his ankles, wrists cuffed at his waist. The orange jumpsuit he wears is a far cry from the fitted shirts and polished smiles of his past life. Here, under the harsh fluorescence of justice, he is stripped of all the armor Instagram once gave him. No filters, no cheerful captions, just a man reduced to the sum of his decisions, standing before a judge who holds the weight of his forever. On the other side of the room, Shanann's family sits rigid. Faces carved in grief and fury, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles bleach white. They do not look at him, not fully. To do so would be to rip open wounds that have barely begun to scab. Instead, their eyes fix on the judge, on the clock, on anything but the man who shattered their world like glass. The charges roll off the clock's tongue in a voice as flat as the prairie beyond these walls. First-degree homicide. Unlawful termination of a pregnancy. Tampering with a body. Words colder than steel, stripped of all emotion, yet heavy enough to bend the spine. And then, the question. How do you plead? Chris lifts his head, just slightly, like a marionette tugged by an invisible string. His voice, when it comes, is soft enough to vanish in the hum of the lights. Guilty. A single word. No explanation. No crescendo. Just the blunt edge of inevitability. The plea deal, inked in shadows long before this day, kills the hope of a trial before it can take its first breath. There will be no theatrics, no carefully staged performances under the gaze of a jury. Only this, life without parole, stacked in cold consecutive layers, stretching out into an eternity of concrete and steel. The judge reads the sentence in a tone carved from granite. The words clang in the stillness like iron dropped on marble. Multiple life terms. No possibility of release. Chris doesn't flinch. Doesn't cry. Doesn't beg. His expression is a mask. Smooth as glass. Reflecting nothing. If remorse lives anywhere inside him, it's buried deep enough to need an excavation team. When the gavel falls, the room exhales. It sounds almost like relief, but relief is a mirage here. Shanann's family bows under the weight of something far heavier than satisfaction. Justice is a thin blanket in a winter like this. It covers nothing. He's led away, chains murmuring their metallic lullaby, head bent not in shame, but in surrender to a future that's no longer his. Outside, the cameras wait, hungry as wolves. Reporters jostle, their questions already loaded, their words sharpened into sound bites. Across the country, screens flicker with the headline, Chris Watts, sentenced to life in prison without parole. For the public, this is the finale, curtain call, roll credits. But we know better, don't we? Stories like this don't end when the cell door slams. They mutate, twist, grow new limbs in the dark, because Chris Watts isn't done speaking, not to the world and not to himself. Behind those walls, his hands will find a pen. His thoughts will spill onto paper like inked confessions that sound holy but drip with venom. He will turn his crimes into scripture, his guilt into a gospel no one asked for. And the letters? They'll tell a story stranger than any courtroom could hold. That's where we go next. Into the grey corridors of a prison, where silence becomes a canvas and obsession becomes art. Prison is a strange kind of quiet. Not the soft hum of suburbia, but a silence that scrapes the nerves. A silence stitched with the clank of doors, the metallic heartbeat of locks sliding home. Days blur into a monochrome loop. Head counts, mealtime monotony, the hiss of fluorescent lights humming like tired ghosts overhead. For Chris Watts, this is forever now. Concrete walls, steel bars, and a clock that ticks in slow motion. At first, he sinks into the routine like a stone into a lake. He eats, he sleeps, he exercises in tight little squares of space that mock the miles he once ran under Colorado skies. But routine is a cruel companion. It whispers, it claws, it forces a man inward until the only landscape left is the inside of his own skull. And Chris, who once curated every detail of his life for public consumption, finds a new stage. Lined paper. The letters begin as confessions, or at least that's what they pretend to be. Long paragraphs inked in tight, slanted handwriting, circling around the gravity of his crimes without ever quite landing in its core. He writes about God now, about redemption and forgiveness. His tone swells with the fervor of a man who has found faith, or found a way to make faith sound like absolution. But read closer, and the ink curdles. Buried between scripture and sanctimony is a thread of venom, thin but unmistakable. It coils around one name like a snake tightening. Nicole. The woman who was supposed to be his escape hatch, his second act. The promise of a life scrubbed clean of responsibility. In these letters, she becomes something else entirely. Not a lover, not even a mistake, but a symbol. A scapegoat carved from his own failure. He calls her Jezebel, Lilith, the serpent in his suburban Eden. He frames himself as Adam, lured by temptation, poisoned by whispers sweeter than honey. The words of an adulteress have brought me low, he scrawls in one letter. Her tongue was a dagger dipped in honey. Another reads like a sermon delivered from the pit. Lord, burn away the sin she sowed in my heart. Strip me clean of the lust that made me blind. If you didn't know better, you might think you were reading the diary of a penitent monk. But these aren't confessions. They're performances. Carefully staged monologues for an audience of one. Himself, a man rewriting his narrative in the margins of a legal pad, painting himself as the tragic saint in a story no one asked him to tell. And outside those grey walls, the letters don't stay buried. They leak. They always do. First to curious reporters, then to the insatiable maw of the internet, where they are devoured, dissected, and regurgitated into threads and podcasts. Every sanctimonious line becomes content, every scripture quote a meme captioned with venom or awe. Meanwhile, the mailroom becomes his second stage. Because while some letters carry judgment sharp as broken glass, others drip with something far stranger, adoration. Women, dozens of them, write to him daily. Some include photographs, their faces tilted just so, lips parted like promises. They tell him he is misunderstood, that they see the real Chris, that he deserves love even now. Some propose marriage, others just want a reply to pin on their fridge like a trophy from the underworld. It's grotesque, but not surprising. Men like Chris Watts rarely vanish into the void. They calcify into something else. Myth, martyr, monster, or, depending on who's writing the fan mail, a muse. And yet, for all the letters, for all the prayers scratched into paper under the jaundiced glow of prison lights, Chris is no closer to freedom. Not the legal kind, not the spiritual kind, not even the kind that lives inside a man's own chest. He's caged by more than steel. He's caged by himself. Still, the outside world can't stop watching, or reading, or asking the question that hovers like smoke. What about her? The woman in the shadows, the mistress who set the internet ablaze, then disappeared like a match flicked into the dark. That's the next turn in this spiral. The chapter where desire becomes a curse word, and the search history of a stranger becomes headline news. Her name drifts back into the spotlight like smoke curling through a keyhole. Nicole Kessinger. For months, she existed as a footnote, a whisper behind the roaring headlines. But when the truth detonated, that whisper became a scream echoing across every screen in America. She was the variable no one wanted to admit mattered. The other woman. The spark in the dry grass of a perfect suburban life. In the police interviews, her voice trembles like glass under strain, each word dripping with the dread of someone trying to rewind, time frame by frame, desperate to find the moment everything veered off the rails. She swears she didn't know. She says Chris told her the marriage was over, that the papers were coming, that he was a man stepping out of one life and into another. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. The problem is, by the time her face flashed on TV, the court of public opinion had already convened. And it doesn't do reasonable doubt. It does fire. It does pitchforks sharpened in comment sections, verdicts handed down in hashtags. The headlines fed it greedily. Watts' mistress speaks. Exclusive. The other woman tells all. They printed her words in bold, stripped of nuance, chewed into sound bites. I believed him. I didn't know. I was lied to. But nuance doesn't trend. Outrage does. And so the internet flayed her alive, pixel by pixel. Reddit threads metastasized like cancer. Conspiracy videos bloomed on YouTube like poisonous flowers, and amateur sleuths turned her search history into a holy text. Every query became a confession in their eyes. Can cops trace deleted texts? What does Amber Frey look like now? The verdict was swift. Guilty, not in court, but in the sprawling echo chamber of collective rage. She tried to explain, gave interviews with the raw edge of someone chewing her own nerves to pulp. But it didn't matter. In stories like this, explanations are paper boats on a flood. They sink before they reach the shore. And then, she vanished. No press conference, no grand exit. Just gone. Changed her name, slipped into the beige anonymity of some distant ZIP code where no one knows her history. At least, that's the official story. The unofficial one? Well, that's where the obsession festers. Even now, years later, her ghost flickers in the corners of this case. Threads pop up on forums like weeds after rain. Spotted? Witness says Nicole lives in Montana. Grainy photos circulate like contraband. Faces ringed in red circles. Captions screaming certainty. It's a witch hunt in Wi-Fi clothing, fueled by the same primal hunger that's kept this case alive long after the ink dried on the verdict. Because here's the truth. The world can't let her go. Not because she's guilty, but because she's a mirror. And we hate what we see in her reflection. Desire. Naivete. The illusion that we can burn down one life and build another from the ashes without scorching our hands. But Nicole Kessinger is gone now, folded into a new life stitched from silence. And yet, she remains here, in the story, Like a watermark you can't scrub from the page. And if you think the machine stops spinning here, you're wrong. Because Netflix hasn't even stepped into the ring yet. And when it does, this whole tragedy mutates into something bigger, slicker, more dangerous. It becomes content. And content doesn't die. It lands without warning. One quiet September morning in 2020, when the world is already drowning in chaos. Netflix drops a new documentary, and within hours, timelines ignite like dry brush in a heatwave. American Murder, The Family Next Door. 90 minutes of curated dread, stitched together from text messages, home videos, and body cam footage so intimate, it feels like trespassing into someone's soul. There is no narrator, no polished commentary smoothing the edges. Just raw fragments. The hum of a doorbell camera, the glow of Shanann's last texts, blooming across the screen like neon confessions. Chris's voice, bending under the weight of his own lies. It's voyeurism disguised as truth-telling, and people devour it like wolves at a feast. Within a day, hashtags bloom across social media like poisonous flowers. # Chris Watts, # Justice for Shanann, # True Crime Obsessed. Reaction videos multiply like bacteria. Podcasts crank out emergency episodes. Voices trembling with the thrill of proximity to something dark and unspeakable. Every frame of that footage is dissected like a sacred relic. The way Chris crosses his arms on the neighbor's porch. The flicker in his eyes during the porch interview. The stiffness in his smile as he pleads into the camera. The internet goes forensic, pixel by pixel. Threads on Reddit spiral into labyrinths of speculation. YouTube channels freeze frame his micro-expressions like divination cards. TikTok teens lip-sync Shanann's Facebook videos in macabre reenactments that rack up millions of views. Even his polygraph test becomes meme fodder. Dark humor twisting reality into something grotesque and viral. And through it all, a question hums under the noise. Why can't we look away? Why does this story, among thousands, hook its claws so deep? Maybe because it's domestic. Familiar. Not a shadowy figure in an alley, but a husband kissing his kids goodnight in a house with throw pillows that say, "Blessed." It's horror sewn into the fabric of everyday life. And that's the kind that keeps us staring, even as it burns our eyes. But here's the cruel paradox. Every click turns tragedy into currency. Every stream fattens the beast. Shanann's videos, once soft little snapshots of family life, are now B-roll for a true crime opera, scored with ominous strings. Her daughter's laughter. Background noise in a cautionary tale, binge-watched under weighted blankets. Some call it awareness, others call it exploitation. The truth, like always, is messy. This isn't about justice anymore. It's about appetite. The kind that chews through the darkest corners of human experience and spits it out as content. And we gorge ourselves on it, pretending it's for closure, when really it's for the quiet thrill that slinks through our veins when we brush against the abyss and survive. Chris Watts knows this, maybe not in a way he could articulate, but in the way fame curdles into infamy, the way letters still flood his cell from women who saw the documentary and decided they wanted to touch the edge of darkness, just to see if it would bite. He's become a cultural artifact now. Half man, half meme, preserved in the amber glow of the algorithm. And that brings us to the end of the spiral. Or what passes for an end in a story that refuses to stop echoing. Because the real question isn't what Chris Watts did. It's why we keep pressing play. So here we are, at the end of the road. Or at least the part where the headlines fade, the hashtags cool, And the story settles into that strange half-life where all true crime eventually goes. Behind concrete walls, Chris Watts breathes under fluorescent skies, marking time in a cell that smells of bleach and quiet despair. His days stretch in perfect symmetry. Breakfast, count, dinner, sleep, repeat. While outside, the world keeps whispering his name, turning his sins into documentaries, memes, and midnight Reddit scrolls. Shanann's videos still live online. Little squares of curated joy frozen in time. Birthday balloons swaying in bright kitchens, toddlers giggling in the glow of a phone screen, captions bursting with hashtags like #blessed and #family first. For some, they're digital tombstones, memorials to lives snapped like brittle twigs. For others, they're cautionary tales, proof that perfection can be a mask. And behind every filtered smile, there might be teeth. And maybe that's why we can't let this one go. Because this isn't a story about shadows lurking in alleys or strangers with knives. It's about a man mowing his lawn on a Sunday morning, waving to the neighbor, planning dinner. It's horror disguised as normal. And that, more than any crime scene photo, scares us to our marrow. We tell ourselves we watch for answers, for justice, for closure. But if we're honest, it's something darker. Curiosity with claws. The thrill of staring into the abyss from the safety of a Netflix autoplay queue. We gorge on these stories under weighted blankets, convincing ourselves it's empathy when it's really appetite. The human itch to graze the edge of ruin without falling in. So what's left after the credits roll? A man rewriting himself in the margins of a prison Bible. A mistress who slipped into the fog of anonymity, her name still hissing in the vents of the internet. Two little girls who should have grown into women, laughing in backyards instead of haunting search histories. And the rest of us, still scrolling, still watching, still wondering what it says about us that we can't look away. If you made it this far, congratulations. You've binged the darkness and survived the night. Now, before you drift into sleep, answer me this. Do you think social media blinds us to the truth? Or do we just prefer the pretty lies? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading. And if this story twisted something in your chest, or just kept you company in the small hours, hit like, subscribe, and share it with that one friend who can't resist a true crime rabbit hole. This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you've just listened to boring true crime for sleep. Good night.